Hello everyone, tonight we journey back to the winter of 1692, to a small village in Massachusetts called Salem. What began as a quiet, tight-knit Puritan community would soon descend into fear, suspicion, and chaos. This is the story of the Salem Witch Trials, one of the darkest chapters in American history, where paranoia led neighbors to accuse one another of witchcraft. Families were torn apart, and the line between truth and superstition was obliterated. The events that unfolded in Salem were not just the result of superstition. They were shaped by social tension, religious fervor, political instability, and personal vendettas that created the perfect storm for mass hysteria. It all began in January 1692, when Reverend Samuel Parris' daughter, Elizabeth, and his niece, Abigail Williams, began exhibiting strange symptoms. They would scream uncontrollably, contort their bodies, throw objects, and claim to see invisible forces tormenting them. Doctors and villagers could find no physical cause for their behavior, and soon rumors spread that the girls were afflicted by witchcraft. In a deeply religious society, where the Puritan belief system emphasized the constant presence of God and Satan in daily life, such behavior could only mean one thing: witches were among them. The Puritan community of Salem was deeply religious and highly suspicious of anything that seemed to challenge the moral and social order. Life was difficult, strict, and harsh. The villagers feared God's wrath and believed that Satan was constantly at work, tempting people to sin. In such an environment, even minor disputes or unusual behavior could be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft. When the strange afflictions of Elizabeth and Abigail became public knowledge, panic spread quickly through the village, and accusations soon followed. The first people accused were typically marginalized or unpopular members of the community. Tituba, Reverend Parris' Caribbean slave, was one of the first to be accused. Under pressure, Tituba confessed to practicing witchcraft and claimed that others in Salem were also witches. Her confession, coerced and likely fabricated, added fuel to the hysteria. Soon, dozens of people were accused, from wealthy merchants to poor farmers, young girls to elderly women. The accusers claimed to see spectral evidence, meaning they could see invisible forms of the alleged witches tormenting them. This spectral evidence was central to many trials, as it allowed accusers to assert that they were being attacked supernaturally, even if no physical proof existed. As accusations multiplied, fear spread like wildfire. Neighbor accused neighbor, old grudges resurfaced, and paranoia became contagious. People began to see witches everywhere, in the actions of their friends, their relatives, and even themselves. The judicial system in Salem, unprepared for such widespread panic, accepted the accusations and spectral evidence with little scrutiny. The Court of Oyer and Terminer was established specifically to hear these cases, and it became a place where reason often succumbed to fear. The trials themselves were terrifying spectacles. Accused witches were interrogated, often for hours, sometimes days, under harsh conditions. They were asked to confess and name accomplices, or face execution. Many were subjected to tests to prove their innocence, which often involved cruel and impossible conditions. Those who refused to confess were assumed guilty and were sentenced to hang. By the summer of 1692, the hysteria had escalated beyond control. 20 people were executed by hanging, and one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. The death toll, however, was just the visible consequence of a much larger social upheaval. The social and political context of Salem played a crucial role in the outbreak. The village had experienced economic tensions, land disputes, and family rivalries, which amplified suspicion and resentment. Religious extremism and fear of the devil made accusations more believable, while the court's willingness to accept spectral evidence turned personal vendettas into matters of life and death. Some historians argue that the combination of psychological stress, social anxiety, and strict religious beliefs created a perfect storm for collective hysteria. One of the most chilling aspects of the Salem witch trials was the involvement of children in the accusations. Girls like Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris were not only the first to display unusual behavior, but their testimonies were taken as truth. The spectacle of children accusing adults lent a surreal and terrifying dimension to the trials. Parents and neighbors were forced to confront the idea that their own children might be under Satan's influence or worse, acting as instruments of the devil. The power dynamics in Salem also contributed to the crisis. Ministers, judges, and other authority figures wielded significant influence over the community. When figures like Reverend Parris and Judge Samuel Sewell endorsed the validity of witchcraft claims, ordinary villagers were compelled to comply, often against their better judgment. The intertwining of religious authority and legal power made it difficult for dissenting voices to be heard. Those who questioned the legitimacy of the trials risked ostracism, suspicion, or even accusation themselves. As the trials continued, more prominent individuals were accused. Rebecca Nurse, a respected elderly woman, was convicted despite widespread support from the community. Her execution shocked Salem, highlighting the terrifying reality that no one was immune from suspicion. Even ministers' wives, who were highly respected and influential, faced accusations. The very fabric of Salem society was unraveling under the weight of fear, superstition, and vengeance. The methods used to prosecute the accused were cruel and often contradictory. Confessions were coerced through threats, intimidation, and promises of leniency. Those who confessed were sometimes spared execution, but faced social stigma and lifelong suspicion. Those who denied involvement were often convicted based on the accusations of others, especially children, leading to their deaths. Spectral evidence, which claimed that the spirits of the accused were tormenting the victims, became a central tool in condemning individuals. Though intangible and unverifiable, it was considered valid in the eyes of the court. Public reaction outside Salem was mixed. Some communities were horrified by the proceedings, while others were fascinated or supportive. News of the trials spread throughout the colonies, contributing to a growing debate about the role of superstition, fear, and religious extremism in public life. Letters and pamphlets circulated, warning communities of the dangers of moral panic and mass hysteria. Yet the events in Salem continued largely unchecked until later intervention. By the fall of 1692, the governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, began to recognize the extreme injustices being committed. He disbanded the Court of Oyer and Terminer, effectively ending the legal machinery that had perpetuated the witch trials. Subsequent courts reversed many convictions and eventually compensated the families of those wrongfully accused. Though the immediate terror ended, the psychological and social scars left by the trials endured for decades. Historians continue to debate the root causes of the Salem witch trials. Some emphasize religious fanaticism and the Puritan belief system. Others point to social and economic tensions, and still others explore psychological explanations, including mass hysteria, stress-induced delusions, or ergot poisoning, which could have caused hallucinations. Whatever the cause, the combination of fear, belief, and societal pressure created an environment where reason was overpowered by terror. The legacy of the Salem witch trials extends far beyond 1692. They serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria, unchecked authority, and the human propensity to turn fear into cruelty. The story has inspired countless books, plays, films, and scholarly studies. Salem itself has become a site of tourism, curiosity, and remembrance, where visitors seek to understand the tragic events and the lessons they offer. Perhaps the most haunting element of the Salem witch trials is the human dimension. Families were destroyed, friendships severed, and innocent lives lost. The fear of witchcraft turned neighbors into enemies, children into instruments of terror, and a small village into a place of horror. The trials remind us that superstition, when combined with power and fear, can have devastating consequences. Even today, scholars, historians, and paranormal enthusiasts explore Salem, searching for lingering traces of the fear and mysticism that gripped the town. Tours, reenactments, and studies keep the memory alive, ensuring that the cautionary tale of Salem is never forgotten. From spectral sightings to haunted houses, the echoes of 1692 continue to stir imagination and fear, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. The story of the Salem Witch Trials does not end with the closure of the court or the execution of those accused. In fact, the aftermath reveals even darker and more complex truths about human nature, fear, and society. The trials left scars not only on the victims and their families, but on the entire colony. Communities were divided, trust was shattered, and the line between neighbor and enemy had been permanently blurred. Families who had lost members to the hangings were left to grieve while also facing social stigma and lingering suspicion. Among the most infamous victims was Rebecca Nurse, an elderly and respected member of the Salem village community. She had been known for her piety, kindness, and long-standing service to the church. Yet she was accused of witchcraft, supposedly causing the afflictions of several girls. Her trial became a turning point in the public perception of the events. Despite overwhelming support from her neighbors and her reputation as a devout Christian, she was convicted and executed by hanging. Her death sent shockwaves through the community and highlighted the perilous nature of the trials. Social status, age, and virtue offered no protection from suspicion. Giles Corey, another tragic figure, met a uniquely horrifying fate. Accused of witchcraft, he refused to enter a plea in court. In response, he was subjected to the brutal punishment known as pressing. Heavy stones were placed upon his chest, and he was slowly crushed. During the ordeal, he reportedly uttered only 2 words, "more weight." His resistance symbolized both courage and defiance, but also underscored the cruelty of the judicial system. Corey's death stands as one of the most haunting images of the Salem Witch Trials, a chilling reminder of the extremity of fear-driven justice. While these high-profile cases illustrate the severity of the trials, hundreds of others suffered social, psychological, and financial devastation. Accusations could destroy reputations, ruin families, and lead to imprisonment, even if they did not end in execution. Individuals accused of witchcraft faced relentless interrogation, public humiliation, and in some cases, torture. The fear of accusation became pervasive, leading many to accuse others preemptively to protect themselves. This vicious cycle ensured that hysteria could not be contained once it had taken root. Psychological explanations for the hysteria have fascinated historians and scholars for centuries. Some suggest that the afflicted girls were suffering from conditions such as epilepsy, hysteria, or stress-induced delusions, which were interpreted through the lens of Puritan beliefs. Others point to environmental factors, such as ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus growing on rye, which can produce hallucinations and convulsions. While these theories offer intriguing possibilities, they cannot fully account for the widespread and coordinated nature of the accusations, nor for the consistency of the behaviors and testimonies throughout the community. Social dynamics also played a critical role. Salem Village was marked by economic tension, political disputes, and long-standing personal grievances. Land disputes, religious rivalries, and family feuds created a fertile environment for accusations to flourish. Personal vendettas could easily be disguised as supernatural claims, and once the court accepted spectral evidence, these personal motives could be weaponized against anyone. The trials were not merely about superstition. They were about power, fear, and the human instinct for self-preservation. The role of religion cannot be overstated. Puritanism emphasized the constant presence of Satan and the necessity of vigilance against his influence. Every misfortune or unusual event could be interpreted as the work of witches or the devil himself. In a society governed by such beliefs, fear became both rational and inevitable. Ministers, church elders, and community leaders reinforced these beliefs, creating a culture where suspicion and accusation were not just tolerated but encouraged. Children were central to the Salem hysteria. Girls like Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris were considered credible witnesses despite their youth. Their claims of seeing specters, being tormented by invisible hands, and naming alleged witches were taken at face value. The participation of children lent a surreal and terrifying dimension to the trials. Parents were forced to confront the possibility that their own children were under supernatural influence or acting as instruments of evil. This inversion of trust, where innocence became a source of fear, amplified the hysteria to unimaginable levels. Spectral evidence, a cornerstone of the Salem trials, remains one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Witnesses claimed that the spirits of the accused appeared to torment them, even when the accused were physically elsewhere. This intangible evidence was compelling enough to secure convictions and executions. Critics argue that this allowed imagination and malice to dictate life or death decisions. Once the court relied on invisible forces as proof, logic and reason were rendered powerless against fear. The involvement of prominent figures such as Reverend Samuel Parris, Judge Samuel Sewall, and later Governor William Phipps shaped the course of the trials. Parris, whose daughter and niece were among the first afflicted, played a key role in promoting the notion of witchcraft and urging legal action. Judge Sewall, while participating in the early trials, later publicly expressed regret for his actions, highlighting the moral complexity and human error that characterized the judicial proceedings. Governor Phipps' intervention ultimately curtailed the court's activities, but only after significant damage had been done. Economic, political, and social tensions further exacerbated the crisis. Salem Village was divided between factions supporting different ministers, controlling land, or vying for influence. Accusations of witchcraft often aligned with these divisions. People seized the opportunity to accuse rivals, settle scores, or gain advantage in disputes. In such a climate, the line between supernatural belief and personal vendetta became blurred, and hysteria became self-perpetuating. The aftermath of the trials was marked by reflection, remorse, and attempts at restitution. Survivors of the accused faced stigma and lifelong trauma. Families who lost loved ones were left grieving, while the broader community struggled with guilt and shame. In the years following the trials, public opinion shifted, and formal apologies and compensation were offered to the families of the victims. The legacy of Salem became a symbol of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and judicial failure. Cultural interpretations of the Salem Witch Trials have evolved over time. Literature, theater, and film have explored the events in countless ways, often highlighting the psychological, social, and moral lessons. Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, for example, used the trials as an allegory for McCarthyism, drawing parallels between witch hunts of the past and modern political persecution. Such interpretations ensure that the lessons of Salem remain relevant, offering insight into human behavior under fear and stress. Modern research into the trials continues to uncover new perspectives. Historians examine court records, personal diaries, and correspondence to reconstruct events and motivations. Anthropologists and psychologists analyze social dynamics, environmental factors, and mental health issues to understand the origins of mass hysteria. Paranormal enthusiasts explore the haunted sites of Salem, claiming to experience lingering traces of fear and supernatural activity. All of these approaches contribute to the enduring fascination with Salem, demonstrating that the events are not merely historical curiosity, but a complex study of human society. The Salem Witch Trials also serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of belief without evidence, fear without reason, and the destructive potential of collective panic. They remind us that societal norms, authority figures, and religious dogma can amplify fear, turning communities against themselves. The human capacity for suspicion, cruelty, and moral compromise is laid bare in these events, offering lessons that remain applicable even today. Perhaps the most chilling element is the human cost. Men, women, and children suffered physically, emotionally, and socially. Innocent lives were taken, families torn apart, and trust within the community shattered. The tragedy of Salem is not merely the executions, but the pervasive atmosphere of fear that allowed such horrors to unfold. Ordinary people, influenced by religious belief and social pressure, became both victims and perpetrators. Even centuries later, the shadow of Salem lingers. The village itself, now a city, embraces its history while acknowledging its dark past. Tours, museums, reenactments, and research ensure that the memory of the trials remains alive. Visitors walk the streets where accusations were made, see the homes of the accused, and ponder the fragility of justice in the face of fear. Paranormal accounts persist, with reports of ghostly figures, strange sounds, and unsettling presences in buildings associated with the trials. In examining the Salem Witch Trials, one sees the intersection of psychology, religion, politics, and society. The trials demonstrate how fear can override reason, how authority can validate hysteria, and how communities can turn on themselves when under stress. They illustrate that superstition and suspicion, when coupled with legal and social power, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. As we conclude this exploration, imagine the chilling winter nights of Salem in 1692. Families huddled in fear, neighbors whispering accusations, children claiming to see unseen forces, and the court operating under the weight of terror and uncertainty. The hangings, the pressing of Giles Corey, the confessions under duress, and the societal paranoia created a perfect storm of tragedy. This is the story of Salem, a tale of fear, power, superstition, and the human capacity for both belief and cruelty. The Salem Witch Trials remain one of the most infamous and studied events in American history. They continue to captivate, horrify, and teach, reminding us that even in the modern world, fear can still shape our actions and societies. The lessons of Salem are timeless: vigilance against hysteria, respect for evidence, and the recognition that justice must be guided by reason rather than panic. Through this dark chapter, we glimpse the fragility of human morality under pressure, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the tragic consequences when fear becomes law. The story of Salem endures, a haunting echo across centuries, challenging us to understand, remember, and learn from the mistakes of the past. The Salem Witch Trials are more than history. They are a warning, a study in human behavior, and a story that continues to haunt our collective imagination. The shadows of Salem remind us that superstition, when fueled by fear and authority, can destroy lives, communities, and reason itself.